Do you like huge lightning explosions that clear massive packs of enemies with a simple right click? Do you like insane war generation and tankiness that makes you practically unkillable in almost all of the content? Do you like pushing around bosses with a level of ease that rivals Arnold curling a 10-pound dumbbell in his prime? If you said yes to these, then I've got the build for you. All right, hello and welcome. This is the Spark Charge Runemaster guide. This is a build that I have had set up since like November, but I did not get around to writing the guide. Now I have. This is 1.0 ready, and it's still very, very strong, and it's very, very fun. There's a lot of great things going on with this build, including the ability to push around enemies, the big explosions, lots and lots of stuff that makes me enjoy this build a lot. It's very tanky. It's just going to be something that people I think are going to really enjoy playing because of just how generally powerful it is in multiple ways. And we'll get into all the pros and cons of this build here in a couple of minutes. But I want to go through pretty much everything that we're going to need to know on this guide here, at least at a baseline. We're going to cover the basics. If you want more information, you want to follow this, I highly recommend you check out my max roll written guide on it. You'll have everything you need to know there, and also some changes that may be happening to it that certainly will be. As of the time that I am recording this, there's already a few things that'll need to change. For example, the 1.0 implicits are not currently in here, so this is not perfectly updated for what you'll get for 1.0, but it's very close, and by the time you actually watch this, if you just go to the max roll guide, you'll get the rest. Okay, so let's talk about what makes this build tick, what makes it work. There are a few things that are really important here. Number one is Fragment of the Enigma. This is what allows us to get enough damage out of spark charges, which is the primary damage dealer here, to use this build effectively. It also increases the area by a very significant amount, and so this is really important for the build. You can play without it, but you'll do a lot less damage before you get it. So I strongly recommend getting this and then using the build. But you can have generally the same setup without it and still do okay. The other thing that's really good is Dragaros Claw. Not nearly as important. A Rune Dagger will work really well until you get this, but this will allow you to actually use Lightning Blast as well. And it has some really good stats on it. So it's a very nice item to have. And then this build does go low life setup. So it goes Last Steps of Living, Exsanguinous, and Experimental Effects on Gloves, which will allow us to generate a ton of ward. This build can easily get well over 15k, even more if you have really great gear in combat. It can get well over 10k standing. So very, very difficult to kill it. And finally, we do use a Peak of the Mountain because we don't want to leech. And so this doesn't leech anyway. This turns off leech, which is perfectly fine. Gives us a ton of crit chance. It's also very easy to make a legendary out of this. So that's the items that you're going to want for this, but you really only need Fragment of the Enigma to get it going, and the rest you can get sort of as you find them. Let's talk about the pros and cons of this build. So pros, it's got great clear, really fun too, to just watch enemies get obliterated by lightning. It's very tanky, very, very tanky. And it's got some of the best CC in the game, thanks to its ability to push things basically all over the place. It has no mana management effectively. You will see your mana go up and down a bit, but your primary ability is a mana generator, and so you really don't have to worry about it. As far as cons go, it is unique intensive, as you could see from what we were going through just a minute ago. It does have lots of repositioning, which is just due to the fact that you're pushing enemies around. It's not a problem under normal circumstances, but when you're fighting a boss, it's going to get slapped all over the place, all over the arena, and so you're going to have to kind of chase it down. It's the downside of having the ability to have so much CC from pushing enemies, but worth it. If you put them into a corner, you'll be fine as long as they don't leave it. It is not the fastest farmer. It is fine at it, but it doesn't have all of the speed stuff of, say, like a Shadow Dagger, Blade Dancer, or Falconer build. Still good enough, but if you're looking for high efficiency farming, this build's probably not for you. The other thing it has is Flame Ward uptime management. Since the Frost Wall Flame Ward interaction no longer works, You will have to keep track of your Flame Ward. You'll have 2 charges of it, and make sure you use it when it makes most sense, either as a damage buff that goes with your enchant weapon, or as a defensive buff if you're about to take a lot of damage. That's the pros and cons. That's the basics of the build. We got that out of the way. Let's talk about some of the details. So we've got skills first. The big one that the build's kind of built around is going to be Mana Strike, which is going to allow you to do spark charges not only through its own tree, but through affixes you're going to get under gear and through the Fragment of the Enigma. You'll be able to apply a lot of spark charges at once. You're also going to have the ability to make this ranged, which makes this even tankier because you're not going to have to get hit. You're going to knock enemies back with repulsing strikes, and you're going to be able to continuously hit them because they can't reach you, but you can reach them. GG. No re. The last thing on here that's really nice is Rune Sap, which gives you increased damage per enemy hit. You're going to hit a lot of enemies with Mana Strike, and so you'll have quite a bit of increased damage from this. Next up, we have Lightning Blast, and do remember that this only applies if you have Dragoroth's Claw, otherwise it won't do anything. In that case, just take Teleport and take nodes like Stable Bubble, Comet Rush, Crystalline Passage, and Time Dilation. But if you do have the Claw, here's how you want to set it up. We are going to go and take all of this stuff for spark charges because that's what the build's around, so of course we want that. And then we're going to take a bunch of stuff to increase the number of chains so that we hopefully increase the number of times we get spark charge to hit. But sneaky, maybe most important part of this is actually Lightning Attunement, which gives us Lightning Aegis. Lightning Aegis is 25% less damage taken, and it will only be turned off if you lose 25% of your health from when it started. And, well, you will never lose 25% of your health because you don't ever have 25% of your health. So basically on all the time, so that's great. Next, we've got Flame Ward, a very powerful offensive and defensive buff. You will start out by taking Dual Aegis, which will give you +1 charges, very important for the build. And then you will go down and take either Barrier, or you'll go across and take Lightning Ward and Infusion, depending on whether or not you want offense or defense first. Neither one are wrong. And you'll also take Extra and Desperate Defense when you are low life. This is especially powerful because it's based on your missing health. Next up is the full offensive buff of Enchant Weapon. This is exceptionally powerful because of one node in particular, which is Celerity. 50% melee attack speed is crazy good, especially for this build. So we're going to build around it by taking Active Duration. We're also going to add Shock Chance. This is our source of shock. And Chill Chance. This is our source of chill as well to round it out. Last up is Frostclaw. This is primarily an ailment applicator. That is its primary purpose. You will proc this through, I don't know how to say this, Mecha Whittle, which is a cast chance on melee hit. And then you will use that to effectively cast or to gain ailment cleanse and also slow and even more chill. That is what it does the best. That is where it really shines. So that's what you're going to get. Also, of course, you're going to get like Shred and whatnot from this as well. This is just going to be another excellent ailment applicator to help make sure that you have all of your ailments on, which you're going to have a ton of. Let's move on to the passives. Now, we have several powerful passives here to talk about. The first one we're going to discuss is Calculated Destruction, which gives us both intelligence and spell critical strike chance, increased spell critical strike chance per intelligence. Intelligence is already a really powerful stat for this build. It gives us increased damage. It gives us ward retention. It also gives us added damage from Fragment of the Enigma. So this is just adding on to what's already a super powerful stat by giving it increased spell crit strike chance. So this is super synergistic with this build. We also have Sphere of Protection, which gives us a reduced damage taken when enemies are shocked or chilled or ignited, which they will be both shocked and chilled, along with additional health that we like for our low life setup because it wants to scale health. We have Arcane Shielding and Shattered Aegis, which are just straight up DR and armor, very good. We have Stormblade, which gives us additional spark charge, which is what we care about here. We don't care about the melee lightning damage very much. We have Mental Catalysis, and this is going to provide us with half of the crit bonus crit reduction that we're gonna need. We want to get to 100% with that so that we don't take any additional damage from crits. We're already halfway there just from this 6-point investment. That's great value. Edict of the Scion gives us area for area skills. We don't care that much about that. It's nice, but we really care about is the ward per rune on area skill use. This is why we put Runic Invocation on our bar, because it's going to give us 108 ward every time we attack with Mana Strike. The last one we're going to talk about is Runic Cataclysm. This one mostly just gives us increased critical strike chance at a pretty high level. It does also give us damage versus low life with Runeward Cataclysm, which we will get. That's extra damage, but this is just a really good crit strike chance node, so we take most of it. That's it for the passives. There's, of course, other things in here that are valuable, like Jagged Veil, but for the most part, we've hit the big ones. There's a lot of value in the passive tree for this build. As far as the rotation goes, how to play it, this is a super easy build to play. You're going to want Flame Ward up as much as you can. You're going to spam Mana Strike. You're going to refresh Flame Ward whenever it makes sense to do it, either before you take damage, before you engage enemies close by, which won't happen too often, but if you do, or enemies that can hit you from far away, or when you want a buff of damage. Speaking of buff of damage, you're going to want to use Enchant Weapon to take down tanky enemies. Combining Flame Ward and Enchant Weapon together is very powerful, because Flame Ward gives you that big increased damage buff, and then Enchant Weapon gives you the big attack speed. So use those together when you can, if you don't need Flame Ward for defense. And then finally, you've got Teleport to move you around, position you, and just help you traverse maps. The other spot is taken by Runic Invocation, which you do not want to use. This is a 4-button build. You don't need to do any more than that. Let's talk about gear now. So gear is very important for this build as far as scaling it really high. You don't need a lot to get started. So like, if we're in the starting section, you can see here, we only have 2 uniques. We have Fragment of the Enigma, which is the big scaler. Again, I said this earlier, but I'll just reiterate. You can play it without this, but you're going to do a lot less damage. Around 40, 50, 60, you're going to really start to feel that. So you do want to have a plan in place to get this. We also use Avarice here, which is something you get from a quest, as a quest reward. Very, very easy to get. And that's all you need to get started. As you get to more advanced stuff, though, you're going to want to start to set yourself up with a low life setup. So you're going to need Last Steps of Living, you're going to need Exsanguinous, and you're going to need a decently rolled experimental affix on your gloves. That will get you a significant boost to your overall EHP. Not necessary, but definitely very powerful. Once you start to instack especially, you're going to want to go this way as soon as you can. It's not the end of the world if you don't. You're still pretty tanky without it. Remember, you're getting 100 ward every time you cast Mana Strike, so you're still pretty damn tanky. But you're going to want to go that route, especially if you're going to get into a Peak of the Mountain. Since you don't have to worry about having any sort of leech whatsoever at that point, you are good to go there, and you can pick up basically 300% increased critical strike chance, which is huge for this build. Because we don't have a ton of added melee, or excuse me, added crit, not added melee, but added crit. We have the 5% base on Spark Charge, and then we have 4% from the dagger. So that's why we're going to use a Rune Dagger, or you're going to use Dragraw's Claw, which has the same base, so that you can scale your crit more easily. These are really important. You are getting a lot of increased crit from the passives, like we mentioned, but it's not enough to get you to cap. You're going to need Peak of the Mountain to get there. So you're going to want to make that switch to get into that whenever you can, as soon as you can. And once you get a Dragraw's Claw, you can switch to that pretty much immediately. I prefer to have melee attack speed on it as quickly as I can. With a Lightning Blast setup, though, it does make sense to kind of go there fairly quickly. But if you don't have melee attack speed, you will notice a significant drop in the amount of attacks you're doing per second. Not as noticeable when you have up Enchant Weapon, but when you don't have it up, it's much slower. So up to you whether you want to make this switch quicker or you want to wait a bit, but you're definitely going to want to go Dragraw's Claw whenever you can. This gear is just going to be basically the same stuff, but more powerful. Nothing crazy in here to worry about. You are going to be scaling a ton of int in this. You want int anywhere you can get it, and it's your priority stat pretty much everywhere you can put it, with the exception being on the gloves. Even on Exsanguinous, you're going to want to get int on it very quickly. Int over even increased health, it's that powerful. One area where that is an exception would be on the helmet, where you'd want the Spark Charge on melee hits, and you want the reduced bonus damage taken from crit strikes to get you capped. But by the time you get to Biss, you definitely want some int on there. All right, let's talk about the blessings. So we're going to get the Crit Strike multi blessing from Rhea. We are going to get Shred Lightning from our good friend Lagon. We're going to take the all res here. We don't need the crit avoidance on the dragon because we're going to be bonus crit capped instead. And then we're going to take both armor options from the top two. These are a very big increase to our damage reduction on hits. All of the other things here are for farming. They're not super important. We don't care too much about them, but you can get them if you're trying to help yourself get some things like Grand Idols. Speaking of idols, here's the setup for that. None of these are like super important. You don't need these to make the build work. They just make it better. But if you need to fill this with like resistances for a while, do not shy away from that. Absolutely do that. But once you can get everything up and running, lightning crit chance and apply spark charge and melee hit are really nice damage buffs. And then ward retention and health arcane idols are significant defensive buffs. Very, very strong. So there are your idols. Build scaling, we pretty much talked about everything that's in here. There's not a whole lot else to talk about. We talked about Fragment Enigma. We talked about how powerful intelligence is, flat spell damage coming from Fragment Enigma and intelligence scaling. Melee attack speed is really powerful. We talked about that on the weapon. We talked about Flame Ward, Rune Dagger or Dragrest Claw. We talked about that. Crit Strike we've talked about. Crit Multi, maybe we didn't talk about enough. Let's talk about that real quick. Crit Multi is a very powerful stat on here, and you will notice that we're going to be putting it in a lot of places. Here it is as the primary stat for the amulet. We don't have it here because we need the Flame Ward for ward retention. But we also put it on the weapon when we can, and the weapon comes with spell crit, so we do want a lot of crit multi whenever we can get it. All right, I think that's good for offensive. Defensive, this also should be about the same. You've got ward, you've got armor. We've talked about scaling armor through the passive tree and through the blessings. Flame Ward being very powerful. We already get our chill very easily. Same thing with frailty on our gear. And we talked about the knockback. This also does stun enemies a lot, so that's also a very powerful thing that it can do because it's lightning, you get shock, you do a lot of stuns with it. Last but not least, there will be a loot filter on this. At the time of this video, it might not be updated to the 1.0 MG and COF filters, but it will be, and the filter that's in here will be perfectly usable. So feel free to use it as you need to, and then 1.0, of course, will have the better filters. That is everything for the guide. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great time with this build. It's a lot of fun, really enjoyable build, and I'll see you all again real soon.